Hi, hello everyone. I'm a tutor of Uplatz. This is React.js session part 17. To know more about us, please use this website address which I have given in my presentation. So let's see the agenda for our today's session. So today we are going to discuss about some of the interview questions and answers which is frequently asked in particular topics in React.js. Hope this would be useful for you to prepare yourself, and this is also like this is a summary of all the 16 session which I have in your for your tutorial. So the first question, so this is like general React. So this first I have splitted this into four parts. So first part would be like general React. So first question is like difference between real DOM and virtual DOM. So what is that? So this real DOM updates slow and virtual DOM updates faster, and it can directly update HTML. It can't directly update HTML. So we need to create a DOM elements if needs update, but here this JSX it will do the update. The real DOM is like very expansive, but virtual DOM is very easy, and we have too much memory waste. This is no memory waste. Just like the two important points coming about this difference directly in an interview, if you face this question, means you can say that real DOM is very expansive compared to virtual DOM, and we have memory wastage. So what is React? So it is like front-end library, JavaScript library developed by Facebook in 2011. So it follows a component-based approach, helps in building reusable UI components. And also it is used for developing complex and interactive web and mobile UI. So even though it is open source and it is used only by 2015, it has one of the largest communities supporting it. So the next question would be, what are the features of React? So already I have told you it uses a virtual DOM and it is as a server side rendering, and it follows unidirectional data flow or data binding. So these are the features in React. So next is some of the major advantage of React is like we have some major advantages in React. What are they? It increases the application performance. It can be conveniently used on the client as we server side. Because of JSX, the code readability will increase here. So this React is easily to integrate with other frameworks like Angular, Meteor, etc. That's why we are telling that as a major advantages of React. So what is limitations? It is just a library, not a full-blown framework. Its library is very large and takes a time to understand. It can be little difficult for programmers to understand, and the coding here it is very complex. It uses inline templating and JSX. What is mean by JSX? So this JSX is a shorthand for JavaScript XML. So this is a type of file used by React which utilizes the expression of JavaScript along with HTML like template syntax. This makes the HTML files really easy to understand, and also this makes our application robust its performance. So here we have some of the JSX examples. I have a render. Inside that I'm just returning a JSX div. So what do you understand by virtual DOM? Explain its working. So I would say this real DOM is lightweight JavaScript object which originally copies the real DOM. So it is a node tree that lists the elements, their attributes and contents and objects and their properties. So like we would also say that React's render function and creates a node tree out of that React's component. So it then updates this tree in responsive to mutations in data model which caused by various action done by the user or a system. So this virtual DOMs works in three simple steps. What are they? So just we can go through that simple steps. So when any underlying data changes, which means entire UI is re-rendered in virtual DOM representation. So whenever your browser changes, this is your virtual DOM structure. So next is like second thing is like difference between a previous DOM representation and new one calculated. It will just compare that with a React difference between the virtual DOM and real DOM. So the third thing is like once all the calculations are done, it will successfully update the changes that have actually changed in real DOM. It will not update the entire thing. So that is why we are telling that it is not expensive as real DOM, and also like things is like memory is not getting wasted. So why this browser can't read JSX? Because it is not a regular JavaScript, right? It is like JSX. So what it will do, it will just first need to transform that JSX file to a JavaScript object that this Babel will do, and then it will pass to the browser. So this is the actual procedure it is doing. So what is the difference between ES6 and ES5 syntax when compared? So syntax have been changed. We uses import, require import in ES5 as we all know. So where React require React. But in ES6, I'm just importing React from React. So export versus exports. Module dot exports in component in ES5, but here export default component. So that is the second thing. And third thing is here, I'm just using React dot create class in order to use my class component, and render I'm just using as a normal function as anonymous. But in ES6, I'm just using the real function. I'm just using my own class component with the class keyword, and I'm just extending react.component. So in props, we have a difference as props types, and I'm just rendering a function inside that and returning the props. This is in ES5. But whereas in ES6, I have a class that props will come from the child. So that is what the difference. When compared to state in ES5, I will just use get initial state as function. But in ES6, I will just use my state, this dot state inside my super or constructor. So this all the major difference what I feel in ES5 and ES6. So the next would be like different from Angular. How? So in voice of architecture in MVC, that is model view controller, the React is only based on view, but as Angular is using all the three. It is server-side rendering, it is client-side rendering. It uses virtual DOM, whereas in Angular it uses real DOM. So data binding is one-way binding in React, but in Angular it is two-way binding. Debugging is compile time, but in Angular it is runtime. Author for React is Facebook. Author for Angular is Google. So these are things different from Angular. How do you understand React? Everything is a component. Why we are saying as a component base in React? Because it will split up the entire UI into small, independent, and reusable, which means if we are making everything as a component in future, we can use any small piece in our code as a separate, as an individual component. We can compile that individual component in a later. So that's why it is we are saying that each thing is component, independent, reusable pieces. Then it renders each of that component as individual of each other without affecting the rest of UI. I'm just going to explain the purpose of render. So each React component must have render as mandatory. It will return single React element, which is a representation of native DOM component. So if more than one HTML element needs to be rendered, then they will group together inside as enclosing tags such as form, group, div, etc. So that function keep pure, that is, it must return same result each time it is invoked. So that is the main thing, purpose of render. How you can embed two or more components into one. How we can do that? So I have a class my component extending my React component. I have a rendered inside that I have a div. So I have a class header extends React components inside render. I have returning my h1, and in my DOM I'm just making my component. So this is we can embed two or more components in one. What is purpose of props? So this props is shorthand for properties in React. They are read-only components which must be keep pure as mutable. They are always passed down from parent to child components throughout the application. A child components can never send back a prop to a parent component. This helps in maintaining the unidirectional data flow and are generally used to render dynamically generate data. So with the state, what is state, how it is used? So the states are heart of React components. A source of data keeps as simple as possible. Basically, the state and objects which determines component rendering and behavior. So they are mute like props and create dynamic interaction. As we all know, we need to access via this dot state. Difference between state and props: it will receive initial value from parent component S, and parent component can change value. No for state, S for props. Set default value inside the component, no, S for states and S for props. Change inside the component, S for states and no for props. So we can set initial value for child components, S for states, S for props. How changes inside child components, taking S for no for states, S for props. How would you update a state of a component? We have a method, special method called this dot set state. For example, I have a state name and ID inside the timeout function. I'm just needed to just changing my name, updating the initial name to the different name, and I'm just rendering inside my return. So this is how you can do that. What is arrow function, how it is used? So we are called this fat arrow function because in ES5 we have inbuilt binding of function, but in ES6 auto binding is not possible, so we are using arrow function with higher order. So you can see this dot handle change dot bind this. So this auto binding is not possible in ES6. We need to manually bind every time. So instead of binding that, you can use the arrow function like this. So differentiate between stateful and stateless component. Stateful stores info about components, state change in memory, but whereas in stateless, it calculates the internal state of the component. We have authority to change the state, but in the stateless, we do not have the authority. It contains the knowledge of the past and current, future, and change, but it contains no knowledge of past, current, and possible future. The stateless component notify them about the requirement of the state changes, and then it will send down the props. Here they will receive the props from the stateful component and then treat as callback functions. What are the different phases of React component lifecycle? So we have three different initial phases, like initial rendering. So this is the phase when component is about to start its life journey, make a way to DOM. Next is updating phase. Once the component gets added to the DOM, it potentially update and re-render only when prop or state changes occur. That happens in this phase. Unmounting, this is a final phase of component's life cycle in which it destroys and removed from the DOM. Explains the life cycle method in detail. So will mount, it execute just before rendering takes place on client as well as in server side. Did mount will execute only on the client side for the first render. So this component will receive props invoke as soon as the props receive from the parent and before another render is happened. This should component update return true or false, which means we need to decide whether the render should happen or not. Component will call just before rendering takes place. Did update will update after rendering takes place. This unmount will it will clear all your memory spaces. So these are the life cycles in React. So this is how you need to explain what is event in React. So in React, events are triggered reaction to specific action like mouse hover, mouse click, key press. Handling those events are similar to handling events in DOM elements, but there are some synthetical difference like events are named using camel case instead of just using lowercase. Events are passed as function instead of strings. So the event argument contains a set of properties which are specific to that particular event, and we have our own properties and behavior that can be accessed via that event handler. How do you create an event in React? Just have a class display extends React component. We have a render. I'm just returning on click this dot show. I have a button called click me. So this is how the event is happening. When you click, the event is getting triggered. What is synthetic event in React? So the synthetic event or object which acts as a cross browser that wraps a native event. They combine the behavior of different browser into one API. So this is done to make sure the event shows consistent properties across different browsers. What do you understand by refs in React? So the refs is shorthand for references is in React. It is just attribute which helps to store a reference to a particular React element or component which will be returned by component's render configuration. It uses to return references to a particular event that returned by render. They came in handy when we need DOM measurements or to add methods to a component. So class reference extends React component. I have a display inside that I have const name input name.demo. I have ID inner HTML. So inside the render, I'm just returning name and button. I have h2 in hello that we have in span. So when you click on that, it will get render. So next list some of the classes which we used as ref. When you need to manage focus, select text or media playback. To trigger imperative animation, you need to integrate with third-party DOM libraries. How do you modularize code in React? By using export and import properties, they helps in writing components separately in different files. First would be child component. I have export class child component extends React component. Inside render, I'm just returning div. Next parent component, I have import child component from that particular child. I have a parent component. I'm just extending my React component inside my render app. So how forms are created? Similar way, we have HTML forms. The component will update happenings via state only and have full access to the data inside that form. We have handle submit. once a form submitted, we have a data there and we will get that data. So this is simple example for that form. Why? What do you know about controlled and uncontrolled components? Basically, this controlled and uncontrolled components, they do not maintain their own state. Instead, they maintain their uncontrolled, maintain their own state. Data is controlled by parent, but in uncontrolled, data is controlled by DOM. They takes in current value through props and then notify the changes via callback. But in ref, they are used to get their current values. So that is the main difference between controlled and uncontrolled components. What are higher order components? This higher order component is an advanced way of reusing the component logic. Basically, it is a pattern that derived from React componential nature. HOC or custom component with wrap another component within it. They accept any dynamically provided child component, but they own modify or copy any behavior from their input components. You can say this higher order components are pure components. What can you do with HOC? HOC HOC are used for many tasks like code reuse, logic, and bootstrapped abstraction. It will render hijacking, state abstraction, and manipulation. We have props manipulation as well as. What are pure components? They are simplest and fastest components which can be written. They can replace any component which only has rendered. These components will enhance the simplicity of code and performance. What is the significance of keys in React? They are identifying unique virtual DOM elements with their corresponding data driving the UI. They help React to optimize the re-rendering by recycling all existing elements in the DOM. These key must be unique number or string using which React just reorders the element instead of re-rendering them. This leads to increase in application performance. So next is like React Redux interview questions. So this is part 2. What are the major problems with MVC framework? We have already told it is very expensive, slow and inefficient, which we have huge memory waste. Because of circular dependencies, they are complicated model created around model and views. What is Flex? Flex is an architectural pattern which enforces the unidirectional data flow. It controls a derived data and enables communication between multiple components using central store which has authority for all the data. So any update in data throughout application must occur here only. So this flux provides stability to application and then it reduces a runtime errors. What is Redux basically? We will say it is like hottest libraries of front-end development, and we have a state container for JavaScript application. Applications developed with Redux are easy to test and they can run in different environments showing consequent behavior. What are the three principles? The state of entire application is stored in an object, just state tree within single store. The single state tree makes it easier to keep track of changes over time and debug or inspect. So the state is like read only. The only way to change the state is to trigger an action. An action is a plain JS object describing the change. So just like state, it is like minimal representation of a data. The action is a minimal representation of a change of that particular data. So the changes are made with pure functions. In order to specify how the state tree is transformed by action, you need a pure function for that. So the pure functions are those returns value depends on the value of those arguments. What do you understand by single source? So storing application entire state at one place. So all the component states are stored in store. They receive updates from the store itself. That is why we are calling that as a single source of truth. The single state tree makes it easier to keep track of changes over time and then debugs or inspect the application. So list down the components of Redux. So it is composed of following components: action, reducer, store, and view. What is that? It is an object that describes how it happened. Basically, that is called as action. What is reducer? It determines how state is getting changed. What is store? It stores entire state of object in a one store. View, it simply displays the data that are displayed in the store. How the actions are defined in Redux? So that we have a property called a type. For action being performed, we need to define the string constant as well as the properties. So I have, for example, below show you actions and action creators. We have a property called type and text. So how the data is flowing. So this would be our component. Okay. So here it is passing to actions. Then to reducer, then we have a one store. It will stores all the data like this. Then it will go to the provider, which means again the re-render is happening, and then again it will pass a state or props. It will again go to action, reducer, store everything. After storing, if you want to view only particular data, the particular store will pass to the provider component, again re-render will happen. So this is how. What is the role of reducer in this? It will take a previous state and action that returns a new state. It will compare. If some anything needs to be done, it will return the new values. Otherwise, it will return the previous state itself. It will does not do any work. We can have multiple reducer, but we cannot have multiple store. That you need to keep in mind. So what is significance of store in Redux? So as store is a JavaScript object which holds application states and provide a few helper methods to access the state. So it will dispatch action and register the listener. So the entire state or object tree of application is saved in single store. So as a result of this Redux is very simple and predictable. We can pass middleware to the store to handle processing of data as well as keep a log of various action that change the state of stores. All the action returns a new state via only reducer. How how Redux is different from Flex? So you have a Flex and Redux. The store contains state and change logic, but in Redux it has only logic separate. We have multiple store, but in Redux we have only one store. All the stores are disconnected and flat. Here single store with hierarchy reducer has singleton dispatcher, no concept of dispatcher here. React components subscribe to store. Here it utilized to connect. It's mutable, it is not mutable. That is what I have said. We can have single reduce, multiple reducer, but only single store. What are the advantage of Redux and advantages of Redux that I have listed below? Predictability to outcome. Since there is always one source of truth, there's no confusion how to synchronize the current state with action other parts of application. In case of maintainability, the code become very easier to maintain with predictable outcome and strict structure. But in terms of server-side rendering, you just need to pass a store created on that server to a client side. So this is very useful for initial render, but it provides better user experience in terms of optimizing the application performance. Next comes to a developer tool. So from action to state changes, the developer can track everything going in application in real time. So next comes to community and ecosystem. It has huge community behind. It makes even more captivating to use. So a large community of talented individuals contribute betterment of library, various application. It is like easy to testing as well as it's pure and isolated. It's precise how code should be organized, how, and it is easier for teamwork to work. So these are some of advantages. So the third part of our interview question is based on router. What is React router? It's a powerful routing library built on top, helps in adding new screens and flaws of application. So this keeps the URL in sync with data that being displayed on the web page. It maintains a standardized structure and behavior. It's used for developing single page web application. This React router has simple API. Why such keyword is used? Because when you want to display a single route to render among several routes, in that time we need to use switch tag to matches the typed URL in a sequential order. Then the first match found, it will display it and then pass the remaining route. Why do we need a router in React? So a router is to define multiple routes, and when a user types specific URL, if that particular URL matches, then path any of the route defined inside the router, then the user is redirected to the particular route. So basically, we need to add a router library to our app and then creating a multiple routes leading to unique view. We have a switch component inside that route. So you can see here, this is my home component, new post and post. So based on priority, first come, first serve. Advantages of React routing is like based on React router, visualize single route, which includes a browser route. So we have a history value as well as wrap other route inside browser route. There is like three packages: web, native, and core. We have compact size of application, easy to switch that. How router is different from conventional routing? Pages involved here, it corresponds to new file, but here only single HTML is involved. URL change, only that history attribute will keep on changing, but the page will not get changed. But here, when request sent to a server, corresponding HTML page will receive. Field, user navigates across different page. But here it will do, but thinking he is navigated across different paging. But it is not like that. We have one page. It is based on that attribute. It is getting changed on history. So that is the difference between conventional and React routing. So this is about some of the three parts of interview questions on the major topics of React. If you have any queries, please write to info@uplatz.com. Thank you. So regarding this practical demos, I have given each separate file for practical demo for each sessions for the React. So please do work on that. Try to install React, or you can install React app and then try to execute all the programs. If you have any queries, please write to info@uplatz.com. Thank you.